Right now, somewhere in your garage, there is a survival cache that costs you nothing extra build that cannot be found on any preparedness website. And that would be worth more in a WW3 grid down scenario than most of what the preparedness industry has been selling for the last decade. You probably already own it. You have probably been meaning to get rid of it. Some of it is in a box labeled for Goodwill. Some of it is on a shelf behind the power tools you use
I can't believe this
every
much
weekend.
junk piled up.
Some of it is the
time to sort
scratchy
this
old
out.
blanket your
What
grandmother
is all this stuff?
gave you that got
I need to
replaced
take
by
a
the
closer
nice
look.
synthetic one from
All
the
right,
outlet
let's see
mall.
what's in here.
The preparedness industry has built a multi-billion
The
dollar
fire's
business
spread,
on
but
the
I
assumption
stand firm.
that readiness requires purchase, that the gap between unprepared
I
and
have to
prepared
find the
is
source
filled
of
by
this.
products.
Whatever it
That
is,
assumption
I'll
is
stop it.
commercially convenient and operationally wrong.
This symbol matches
the
the
most
ancient
valuable
texts.
survival items
Yes,
in a
it connects to
wartime
lost
grid down
civilization.
scenario
Eureka!
are not the ones designed to look tactical. They are the ones engineered through decades of actual domestic and industrial use
Time to get
function
to
without
work.
batteries,
Let's
without
tighten
grid
things
power,
up.
without
Almost
supply
got
chain
it.
continuity, and without any infrastructure that a WW3 scenario can remove. Most of those items are already in your possession. This video is a
Whoa, a
field
number
guide
7
to what
pan?
they are,
That's rare.
why they matter,
Can't donate
and
this gem.
most importantly,
Oh,
why
this
you need
old
to stop
thing.
treating them as
Still,
junk right now.
it might be useful.
Drop keeping it,
Okay,
or
in you go.
throwing it out in
Gotta
the
find that
comments
hidden
immediately.
treasure.
Because item number 8 on this
What's
list
this?
is the one that
Shiny.
most people in the preparedness community have been
I think the coast
incorrectly
is clear
storing,
now. All right,
partially
let's check it
using,
out.
and eventually
Whoa, what's
discarding without
this?
knowing that they just poured a critical survival
to flip.
resource down the drain.
Woo,
That
perfect
item is
landing.
coming.
Almost
But the
ready.
foundation begins with the one that most people have either thrown away or banished to the back of the cabinet because the non-stick coating on modern cookware felt like an upgrade. Item 1, the cast iron skillet or any cast iron cookware. Most people either gave it away because it weighs 4 times more than modern non-stick and requires maintenance that the cookware industry trained them to consider inconvenient, or they have in the back of a cabinet that never gets opened. The mistake is treating it as an obsolete cooking tool. Here is what cast iron actually is. A grid-independent, fuel-agnostic, chemically inert cooking surface with functional lifespan measured in generations, not years. When the grid fails, and in a WW3 scenario, the grid fails faster and more completely than most people's plans account for, modern non-stick cookware becomes useless within days. The non-stick coating on PTFE-based pans begins to degrade and off-gas toxic perfluorocarbon compounds at temperatures above 500 degrees Fahrenheit, temperatures routinely achieved over an open fire or an improvised camp stove. Cast iron has no coating to degrade. It is solid iron. It heats over any fuel source with fire, propane, coal, biomass, and distributes heat more evenly than any modern pan due to its thermal mass. The specific survival multiplier for cast iron extends well beyond cooking. A cast iron pan heated to 500 degrees and held for 30 minutes achieves surface temperatures sufficient to sterilize water-based contaminants and char sterilize metal instruments, forceps, needles, wire, for improvised medical use. Buried in soil with the mouth sealed, it functions as an improvised charcoal production vessel for activated charcoal water filtration. At 15 pounds of solid iron, it functions as an improvised press for food dehydration, or as a weight anchor for any construction or shelter application requiring a ballast mass. Keep the cast iron. Do not sell it. Do not give it away. Season it with any cooking oil at 450 degrees for 1 hour, and store it with a thin oil coat on the cooking surface. It will outlast every other item in the kitchen by 50 years, and becomes more valuable as every non-cast alternative fails. Item 2. Manual hand tools. Specifically a hand drill with a brace and bit set, a manual hand saw, and a manual can opener. All 3 are sitting in the toolbox or on the workbench behind the cordless drill, the circular saw, and the electric can opener that replaced them. The mistake is assuming that the power tool upgrade made the manual tool irrelevant. Here is the problem. Every power tool in your garage has a runtime measured in battery charge cycles or grid power access. When the grid is gone and the batteries are dead, which happens within 2 to 7 days in a sustained grid down scenario, the cordless drill is a $200 paperweight with depleted lithium cell. The hand brace and bit set is unaffected. It requires nothing except human mechanical advantage to produce a rotating cutting force at the drill point, and it can bore holes in wood, soft metal, and masonry indefinitely without power input. The manual hand saw functions on the same principle. In a wartime scenario where shelter construction, fortification, or structural repair is a survival priority, which it is in every documented wartime civilian survival record, the ability to cut wood without power is not a convenience. It is the difference between having a door and not having one. The manual can opener requires less elaboration. The electric can opener becomes a countertop decoration the moment the grid fails. The manual opener is the only device that accesses your stored food inventory. It weighs 4 ounces, costs $3, never needs charging. Buy 10 of them. Distribute them throughout every kit, every bag, every cache you own. Item 3. Glass mason jars. The ones taking up shelf space. The ones from a canning project that was abandoned. The ones whose lids have been misplaced. The mistake is treating them as single-use kitchen items. Here is what a mason jar actually is in a grid-down survival context. A multi-use, chemically inert, sealable, transparent container with a standardized lid system that can perform water storage, long-term food preservation, fermentation vessel function, improvised oil landing construction, and sealed sterile container for medical supply storage, all in a single device that costs under $1 new and $0 from the shelf in the garage. The fermentation function deserves specific attention because it represents a food security capability that most preppers have never considered. A mason jar filled with cabbage and 2% brine by weight, sealed and stored at room temperature, produces lacto-fermented sauerkraut within 7 to 10 days without refrigeration. This is a vitamin C source in a grid-down scenario where scurvy, the vitamin C deficiency disease that killed sailors on long voyages for centuries, becomes a real risk within 4 to 6 weeks of fresh produce elimination. The mason jar is also a barter currency. In every documented post-collapse economy, from the Soviet black market to the Sarajevo siege economy, sealed, transparent containers became high-value trade items because they enable food preservation and water storage for people who do not have them. Do not throw away mason jars. The lids are standardized. Ball and Kerr lids are interchangeable. Buy replacement lids in bulk now. They cost pennies each. Pause here. 3 items have been covered. Cast iron cookware, manual hand tools, and mason jars. And the pattern is already clear. The value is not in the newness of the item or the sophistication of its design. It is in the grid independence, the multi-use architecture, and the simple physical durability that older, simpler objects consistently have over their modern replacements. Comment, still here, if you're continuing, because item 8, the one that most people have been misusing and discarding without knowing what they lost, involves a chemistry that sounds dangerous and isn't a shelf life that manufacturers lie about, and a survival application that the EPA has tried to complicate into irrelevance. It is coming. First, the item in your garage that looks completely dead and is actually a 12-volt power station that most people are about to hand to a battery recycler. Item 4. The old lead-acid car battery, the one that no longer starts the car reliably, that the mechanic said was too weak for cold cranking, that is currently sitting on the garage floor waiting for the next recycling run. The mistake is treating a battery that can no longer start a vehicle as a dead battery. Here is what it actually is. A 12-volt DC power source with residual capacity that, while insufficient to deliver the 400 to 600 cold cranking amps required to start a combustion engine, retains full functional capacity at low-draw DC applications for months or years beyond its automotive usefulness. A battery that cannot start a car can still power a 12-volt AM/FM radio continuously for 40 to 80 hours. It can power a 12-volt LED lighting strip for 100 to 200 hours. It can charge a smartphone through a 12-volt to USB adapter over 20 to 40 full charge cycles. It can run a 12-volt water pump at low flow for extended periods. The scientific explanation is the distinction between cold cranking amperage, the peak current delivery capacity, and reserve capacity, which is the battery's ability to deliver a sustained low amperage current over time. A battery that has lost peak delivery retains reserve capacity significantly longer because the cell degradation that limits cold cranking happens at the electrode surface level, not throughout the electrolyte volume. This means a battery the mechanic condemned still contains useful energy that is accessible to any low-draw 12-volt application. Do not recycle it. Connect a maintenance charger to it monthly. Stored in a temperature-controlled location, cold temperatures dramatically accelerate self-discharge in lead-acid batteries, and when the grid fails, it becomes a communication and lighting power source at a moment when both are critical. The multiplier extends further. A lead-acid battery can perform electrolysis on water, the process of using electrical current to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, which, while not a primary water purification method, has documented utility for generating small quantities of hydrogen gas for specific chemical applications and for testing water conductivity as a contamination indicator. Item 5. Old wool blankets. The ones replaced by synthetic fleece. The ones in a storage bag because they are scratchy and heavy. The ones that came from a grandparent's house and have been in the closet since. The mistake is believing that synthetic thermal products replace wool because they are better. They are better in one specific condition: dry, low exertion, indoor use. Under every other condition that a WW3 grid-down scenario produces, wool is categorically superior. The critical distinction is the wet insulation property. Synthetic fleece at 100% water saturation retains approximately 20 to 30% of its dry insulation value. It can still provide marginal warmth when wet. Wool at 100% water saturation retains 60 to 80% of its dry insulation value. The mechanism is a structure of the keratin protein fiber itself, which has a scaled, water-resistant outer surface that resists immediate water absorption and a hydrophilic inner core that can absorb up to 30% of its own weight in moisture vapor, the sweat and humidity generated by the human body, while maintaining warmth, because the moisture is held within the fiber's structure rather than resting against the skin's surface. This is why Royal Navy sailors wore wool rather than synthetics in the North Atlantic, and it is why the U.S. military maintained wool blanket specifications in cold weather gear programs long after synthetic alternatives existed. In a grid-down winter scenario where shelter heating fails and outdoor movement in rain or snow is unavoidable, the difference between a wool blanket and a synthetic one is a measurable difference in core temperature maintenance, which is a measurable difference in survival outcome. The wool blanket also functions as a fire suppression tool, smothering a small fire by oxygen exclusion, as a stretcher material for emergency casualty carry, as a prefiltration layer for improvised water filtration, and as a barter item with immediate recognized value in any cold weather community. Item 6. The old bicycle, flat tires, chain that needs oil, gathering dust in the corner because a car is faster and more comfortable. The mistake is treating a bicycle's utility as contingent on the road conditions and fuel availability that normal life provides. Here is what the bicycle becomes when roads are gridlocked. Fuel is unavailable and covering distance on foot is too slow. The most fuel-efficient transportation technology ever engineered. A bicycle at moderate pace covers 5 times the distance of a walking human for the same caloric expenditure and 10 times the distance at the same time investment. In a WW3 grid-down urban scenario where vehicle movement is complicated by gridlock, fuel depletion, and potential interdiction, a bicycle allows movement that a vehicle cannot complete and a pedestrian cannot complete efficiently. The specific survival multiplier for the bicycle extends beyond transportation. The bicycle pump, standard equipment, is a manually operated compressed air source that functions as a wound irrigation device when fitted with a thin flexible tube adapter, as an improvised bellows for fire management, and as an air pressure tester for any pressurized container. The bicycle inner tube, a $3 component, is a surgical quality tourniquet material with elastic recoil properties equivalent to commercial tourniquet bands, and a water-resistant equipment wrapping material for waterproofing stored items. Fix the flat tires. Lubricate the chain with any available oil. A bicycle in operational condition is a transport capability, a communication capability through range extension, and a mechanical resource with multiple extracted components. What is about to be described in Item 8 will make some people laugh, because they have heard it suggested before in a context that made it sound trivial. The just use bleach advice that appears in every basic disaster preparedness pamphlet. What those pamphlets never explain is the chemistry behind why it works, the shelf life reality that most people have completely backwards, the concentration threshold that's separate effective treatment from useless dilution, and the 5 survival applications beyond water purification that make old bleach bottles one of the most undervalued items in any garage. But that requires the foundation of item 7 first, because item 7 is the one that people have in tangled piles in drawers and on shelves and have never thought twice about, and it is the structural backbone of almost every physical survival application that follows. Item 7. Old rope, bungee cords, paracord, and any other cordage currently tangled in a drawer, hanging on a hook, or coiled on a shelf. The mistake is treating cordage as a task-specific tool, something you use when you need to tie something, and ignore otherwise. Here is what cordage is in a survival context. The fundamental physical interface between the human ability to plan and the physical world's resistance to that plan. Every structure requires cordage or fasteners to remain standing under load. Every carried load requires cordage to remain organized and mobile. Every perimeter requires cordage to carry an alert system. Every medical application requiring immobilization, splinting, sling construction, wound compression, requires cordage of appropriate diameter and tensile strength. Paracord, commercially rated at 550 pounds minimum breaking strength, is the gold standard for survival cordage because the outer sheath can be removed to reveal 7 inner strands, each rated for approximately 50 pounds, which can be separated and used for fine detail applications. Suture cordage for wound closure in genuine emergency medical scenarios, fishing line, tripwire, and thread for field repairs. A single 100-foot hank of Type 3 550 paracord, available for under $15 at any hardware store, contains over 700 feet of usable cordage when all strands are separated, and it weighs less than half a pound. But even the non-paracord rope in the garage, the old clothesline, the bungee cords, the random twine from packaging, has direct applications. The bungee cord is a tension-securing device with elastic recoil that conventional rope cannot replicate, and it functions as an improvised tourniquet tensioning device, a gate or door securing mechanism, and a structural tensioning element for any improvised shelter that requires consistent pressure maintenance. Organize the cordage, sort it by diameter and material, coil it and label it. A well-organized cordage inventory in a grid-down scenario is a construction material, a medical supply, a perimeter security system, and a barter commodity all in the same storage bin. The multiplier for cordage extends into a domain most people never consider, the social economy. In every documented wartime or disaster period barter economy, from the post-World War II German black market to the Sarajevo siege trading network, cordage in good condition was a consistently requested trade item, because everyone needs to tie things, and nobody stockpiles rope on purpose. The person who organized their garage cordage before the event becomes a tradable goods node in the barter network within the first week of the event. That trade position is worth more than the rope itself. Comment 7 down if you're following along and tracking which items you currently own. Because what comes next is the item that 90% of people have in their garage right now in partially used bottles, and that 90% of people have been either thrown away when the label discolors or misusing in ways that eliminate its most important survival functions. Item 8. Isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol, the brown bottles with the 70 or 91% concentration label that accumulate in medicine cabinet overflow boxes in the garage. The mistake is treating it as a single-use first aid supply, something you put on a cut before the actual medicine arrives. Here is what isopropyl alcohol actually is chemically: a broad-spectrum antimicrobial agent effective against bacteria, fungi, and most enveloped viruses at concentrations above 60%, a highly effective fire-starting accelerant with combustion temperature suitable for igniting damp tinder, a surface decontamination agent effective against chemical contaminants, including many petroleum derivatives, a rapid evaporative cooling agent for fever management through skin application, and a solvent base for improvised adhesives, sealants, and ink preparations. The concentration matters enormously, and this is where most people get it wrong. The common belief is that higher concentration, 91%, is always better for antimicrobial application. It is actually less effective than 70%. This sounds backwards until the mechanism is understood. At 91% concentration, the alcohol evaporates from the target surface faster than it can denature the protein structures of bacterial cell walls. At 70% concentration, the presence of 30% water slows evaporation, allowing sustained contact time with the target surface, which produces more complete protein denaturation and more reliable bacterial kill. This is why 70% isopropyl is a clinical standard in hospital-grade surface disinfection protocols, not 91%. The practical implication: the half-empty 70% bottle is more valuable for wound care than the full 91% bottle. Use the 70% for medical applications. The 91% is superior for fire starting and as a solvent due to its lower water content and higher combustion energy density. Both have value. Neither should be discarded. Both should be stored in a cool, dark location in sealed containers. Isopropyl alcohol evaporates readily through imperfect seals, and the concentration changes with exposure, reducing its antimicrobial efficacy over time. But isopropyl alcohol means nothing for the largest volume survival application in a grid-down scenario, which requires a different chemistry entirely, and brings us to the item that the EPA and water utility companies have deliberately overcomplicated to the point where most people don't trust their own ability to use it. Item 9. What the EPA's water treatment guidelines actually say about household sodium hypochlorite bleach, and what the water utility communications almost never communicate clearly, is that the basic chemistry of chlorine-based water disinfection is simple, measurable, and reliable in the hands of any person who understands two numbers, 8 and 13. These are the drop counts per gallon for clear water and cloudy water respectively, using 6% sodium hypochlorite, standard unscented household bleach. 8 drops per gallon of clear water, 16 drops per gallon of cloudy water. Stir and wait 30 minutes before drinking. That protocol, published by both the CDC and the World Health Organization, disinfects water against bacterial pathogens and most viruses with the same efficacy as municipal water treatment at scale. Most people do not know this, or they know it vaguely and distrust it because it sounds too simple. It is not too simple. It is chemistry. Sodium hypochlorite in water undergoes hydrolysis to produce hypochlorous acid, HOCl, which penetrates bacterial cell walls and oxidizes sulfur-containing proteins and enzymes essential to cellular function. The bacteria die. The chemistry does not care about grid status, about supply chain continuity, or about whether the bleach bottle has been sitting open in the garage for 6 months. Item 9. Old, partially used bleach. The bottles with reduced fill levels and discolored labels that most people throw away because they assume the contents have expired. The mistake is not just discarding a valuable item. It is discarding it based on a shelf-life misunderstanding that the bleach manufacturing industry has never adequately corrected. Sodium hypochlorite does degrade over time. It converts gradually to sodium chloride and sodium chlorate, reducing the active disinfection concentration. The degradation rate depends primarily on temperature and light exposure. Stored in a cool, dark location, which a garage often provides, household bleach retains approximately 80% of its label concentration after 6 months, 50% after 1 year, and 20 to 30% after 2 years. The practical corrective is not discarding degraded bleach. It is adjusting the dose. A bottle that is estimated at 50% of original concentration requires double the standard drop count to achieve the same disinfection efficacy. Degraded bleach is not useless bleach. It is bleach with a corrected application protocol. Never throw it away. The 5 survival applications for household bleach beyond water purification are surface decontamination at 2% dilution, wound irrigation at 0.05% dilution, the Dakin solution concentration used in clinical wound care, fabric decontamination for chemically exposed clothing, visual signal marking on dark surfaces using a bleach-soaked cloth, and mold and mildew suppression in shelter environments where humid conditions promote structural degradation. 1 item, 5 survival applications. Currently in your garage in a bottle with a faded label. Keep it. Item 10, the manual grain mill, or if not a grain mill, a manual coffee grinder, a mortar and pestle, any device that applies mechanical force to reduce solid food material to a processable form without electricity. This is the item that most people have either inherited from a grandparent and kept as a decorative object, purchased once during preparedness phase and never used, or encountered at a garage sale and left because it looked like too much work. The mistake is treating manual food processing as irrelevant in an era of electric appliances. Here is a problem nobody discusses. A grid-down scenario with a stockpile of whole grains, rice, wheat, oats, dried corn, produces a food security position that is only as valuable as the ability to process those grains into edible form. Whole wheat berries require milling before they can be used in the majority of bread and flatbread preparations. Dried corn requires grinding for cornmeal. Oats require rolling or grinding for porridge preparation that does not require extended boiling, which conserves fuel. The caloric density of whole grain stores, which is the most cost-effective, shelf-stable caloric storage format available, is effectively inaccessible without a grinding mechanism if the grid is down. A manual grain mill, operated by hand crank at approximately 50 to 100 revolutions per minute, produces enough flour from whole wheat berries to bake a family's daily bread allocation in under 20 minutes of manual operation. The Country Living Grain Mill, the Wonder Mill Junior, and the Diamond D525 are purpose-built for this application at price points between $250 and $400 new. But a basic manual coffee grinder, available at any thrift store for $2 to $5, can process dried grains in smaller batches for individual or small group use. The multiplier extends to dried legumes, dried herbs for medical applications, and the production of coarse ground materials for water filtration media construction. Here's a full inventory, and notice what it is not. It is not a gear list. It is not a product recommendation. It is a reevaluation of what you already possess. Cast iron cookware, manual hand tools, glass mason jars, the old car battery, the wool blanket, the bicycle in the corner, the cordage in the drawer, the isopropyl alcohol on the shelf, the bleach under the workbench, the grain mill or coffee grinder that has not been touched in years. 10 items. Combined survival value in a WW3 grid-down scenario that no comparable financial investment in purpose-built preparedness gear can replicate, because these items are already in your possession, already paid for, already available at the moment the grid fails. No shipping delay, no supply chain, no stock out, no price surge. They are already yours. The only question is whether you recognize what you have before the moment arrives when their value becomes undeniable. No guarantee that owning these items means surviving. Survival has never been guaranteed by possessions. What these items do is reduce the number of critical capability gaps in your position at Resource Zero, and in the first week of WW3, fewer gaps means fewer lethal decision points. You now understand more about practical grid-down asset value than almost anyone who has spent money trying to buy that understanding. The advantage was already in your garage. One honest question this week. Which of these 10 items do you have right now, and which one are you now keeping that you were about to discard? Specific. Name it. Comment it below. Think something on this list doesn't hold up, that a different item belongs here, or that one of these has a limitation that was missed. Drop the challenge. Best specific, source alternative gets pinned with a real response. If this saves something valuable from your next Goodwill run, share it with one person who is cleaning out their garage this weekend. Not for the algorithm. Because the person who throws away the cast iron and the bleach this Saturday will not be able to replace them when the shelves are empty. Stay resourceful, stay observant, or stay blind to what you already own. The choice is in the garage. The progress bar still is content. 99% of viewers are already gone. The 1% who stayed get item 11, the one that was deliberately excluded from the list because it is not in most garages, costs almost nothing to acquire, and is so obviously useful in a grid-down scenario that including it in the main list would have felt like cheating. It is the manual water pump, specifically the simple hand pump mechanism that can be retrofitted to any existing well or cistern, available from agricultural supply stores for under $150, and capable of delivering water from depths of up to 25 feet without any power input beyond human arm movement. The standard electric submersible well pump that supplies water to most rural homes stops functioning the moment grid power fails. The hand pump attached to the same well casing continues to function indefinitely, operated by anyone, requiring no fuel, no electricity, and no special knowledge. If there's a well on or near the property, a hand pump retrofit is the single highest return preparedness investment available to a rural household. If there is no well, a hand pump can be used with manually dug or driven point well, a steel pipe driven into a water table at depth, which is a skill with a 200-year American history in rural areas and requires only a pipe driver, a well point, and the patience to drive pipe. Comment the word pumped if you found this. Welcome.